Welcome back to another episode of the Emetophobia-Free podcast. Today we are joined by Coach Matt, who is live all the way from the States. Am I right there, Matt?
That's right. Yep. Rhode Island, East Coast. Yep.
Rhode Island. Very nice. So Matt works predominantly with emetophobia sufferers and has joined us today to talk about a very important topic, which is the imagination and how powerful our imagination is. And we want to talk a little bit about that today because our imagination plays a massive part in emetophobia. We want to talk about why we always imagine the worst case scenario and give you a step-by-step guide on how to use your imagination to help you rather than hinder you. Because it is a big part of the program and it is something that you do need to get a handle on in order to overcome your emetophobia.
Yep.
So let's dive straight in. So Matt, why do we always imagine the worst case scenario when we've got emetophobia?
So it all comes down to our belief systems, everything. So when we're imagining the worst case scenario, it's because we have the belief that I can't cope with what I think is going to happen.
Right.
So because of that, we think in unhelpful ways. We think catastrophically. We think negatively. We assume the worst is going to happen. The reason we're doing that, and we all have these different ways of thinking, we just use them to a greater or lesser extent. Sometimes we use them for helpful things. If you have emetophobia, you're unfortunately using them for unhelpful things. But the catastrophic way of thinking in particular is just your brain trying to get more control over the situation that you feel and really believe that you can't cope with.
Right.
So it's just imagining worst case scenario. So, all right, if I go to that restaurant, I'm probably going to panic and let me think about what could be on the menu. And when I get there, I need to know where the exits are, where the bathrooms are. So it's just imagining how can we get more control over this situation because we hate being out of control because that's all that emetophobia is. That catastrophic way of thinking, using your imagination to think of the worst, that's great if you're a police officer or a firefighter or anything like that, where you need to know, all right, when I get there, what do I do to make sure I avoid the threat? That's very helpful there. It's not so much helpful when your brain is trying to protect you from a threat that's not real.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is a way to try and prepare yourself. I remember when I had emetophobia, I always thought of the worst case scenario. So you gave an example of a restaurant there. If I was going out for tea, I would imagine feeling physically sick, sitting at the restaurant, thinking I'm not going to be able to eat this. I would imagine cutting into my food and seeing that it was undercooked. Or I'd imagine looking at the plate and seeing there was something on the plate that shouldn't have been on the plate, as in a bit of dirt, or the waiter looked sick, or the waiter looked ill, or I would imagine all of these things going wrong because I was trying to protect myself. It's like a defense mechanism almost, trying to be in control, trying to protect myself from that worst case scenario so that if it did eventually arise, I would know how to handle it in my own mind. Because if I was prepared, I'd feel more in control.
Exactly.
But it doesn't work that way in terms of emetophobia. We really need to understand how detrimental that is when it comes to overcoming emetophobia, because ultimately by imagining the worst case scenario, what you are doing is creating a whole heap of anticipatory anxiety. And therefore, before you've got anywhere near the restaurant, even when somebody says, the minute they said you want to go out for tea, your immediate reaction is dread and fear because you immediately start imagining the worst case scenario and what could go wrong. So when we talk about imagination, this is something that everybody has, right? Everybody imagines scenarios, emetophobes or not. Okay, so we imagine future scenarios. Some we imagine helpfully, some we imagine unhelpfully. And we can't switch your imagination off.
Like you said, we can't just switch it on or off. It's going all day long. We just don't realize it. And it's only once we realize why our brain is even working like this that we can start to change things.
Yes.
So now, like what we talked about before, the listeners, the viewers, now they know, okay, that's why I always assume the worst case scenario. It doesn't have to always be like that. It's because I believe I'm going to have a panic attack. The belief is creating all the thoughts about me having a panic attack. All the thoughts are creating all the sensations and my heart beating fast, right? So we're doing it to ourselves, and it's not something to beat yourself up about. It's good once you realize you're doing it to yourself, because now you can change it. Because if it was an external thing happening to you, you couldn't do anything about it, and that would That would stink.
Brilliant. Yeah. So what's important to understand is the power of our imagination, because it is ultimately more powerful than our willpower. Now, as emetophobes, we spend a lot of time using our willpower. So the example I gave of that restaurant, I was like, no, I'm going to go to the restaurant and I'm going to sit there and I will eat something. And I would push myself and force myself using willpower to go to the restaurant and at least attempt to eat something,
Mm-hmm.
because I really wanted to. Okay, I really, really wanted to do these things, and I was determined that emetophobia wasn't going to stop me doing things. It did ultimately, but I was really consciously trying my very best not to panic, not to start shaking, not
Yep.
to feel as sick as I knew I was going to feel. Right, I was putting so much conscious effort in, but what I didn't realize was that there was this opposing force,
Mm-hmm.
which is my imagination. And as part of the manual, if you are going through the manual, if been through the manual, you'll be aware of this psychologist, who's a guy called Emile Coué, and he was a French psychologist born in the 1800s. And he famously said, if your imagination and your conscious will are in conflict, your imagination invariably gains the day, which means I really, really want something. I'm putting loads of effort into doing this thing, but I'm imagining not being able to do it. Your imagination is going to win that. Okay, so
Yep.
you're invariably going to panic or going to do the thing that you're trying to avoid or going to feel the way that you're trying to avoid feeling,
Mm-hmm.
because it's more powerful than your conscious will.
Yep.
So when that comes to emetophobia, you kind of want to look at it as a want versus fear. So I really want to be able to look after my kids when they're sick. I really want to be able to do that, but I fear I'm not going to be able to. What I'm
Yep.
imagining is panicking and shaking and keeping them at arm's length and running out of the room. That's what I'm imagining, but I really want to be able to be there and to comfort them and give them a hug.
Mm-hmm.
The want versus fear is the battle that I'm talking about here. So,
Yep.
in terms of the broader perspective of emetophobia, that is, I want to cope with being sick, but I fear I'm not going to be. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to be able to, because that's the underlying crux of it, if you will. But if we look at that in a different context, so a day-to-day context, let's say you go to a new yoga class, right? And you're thinking, okay, I'm really going to enjoy this yoga class. I'm going to do my stretches and, this is all right. I can handle this. But then the teacher halfway through the class says, right, okay, we're going to do a balance now. And you go, okay, my belief is I can't balance, right? I'm rubbish at, I've always been rubbish at balancing.
Mm-hmm.
Your imagination kicks in straight away and you imagine wobbling. Before you've even got into the balance pose, you imagine wobbling and falling over. But you are really trying not to. You're
Yep.
really focusing and concentrating on balancing. But because you keep repeatedly imagining falling and wobbling, ultimately that's what you're going to do.
Yep.
So this is very, very important when it comes to emetophobia, because if you are continually imagining yourself not coping, and you're continually imagining yourself avoiding, and you're continually imagining yourself performing all your safety seeking behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not allowing yourself to imagine what you want to happen rather than what you fear will happen, then you are going to continuously hit a roadblock, because your imagination is more powerful than your conscious will.
Yep.
Okay. So when we are looking at how this links to your inner voice, we all have an inner voice. And when we are telling ourselves, just like I explained there with the, oh no, I can't balance, I'm rubbish at balancing, you've got to get your inner voice in line with your imagination as well. So it's no good in going, okay, well, I really want to balance. And you're going, yes, okay, I'm telling myself, I'm building a belief that I can balance. I'm looking at all this evidence that I can balance, and I'm testing it out and practicing balancing, but I'm still imagining not balancing.
Yep.
You've got to get them in line. They
Yep.
have to be side by side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I wanted to give a really clear example of that from my own journey, and then perhaps you can jump in with some examples of your own. Now, when I was going through the Emetophobia-Free program, and I realized how important my imagination was, I thought, right, I need to put some time and some energy and some effort in here, because it is so easy to use my imagination unhelpfully.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy. It's so habitual. It's as easy as breathing to imagine things going wrong, and to imagine myself performing all of my safety seeking and avoidance behaviors, because that's what I've done for years. So what does it even look like for it to go right? How do I even want to do this task? So a really clear one that stands out for me was, it's a very British thing, I do apologise, but it's making a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Right? And we admit we make a lot of cup of teas. I'm being stereotypical here, but I personally
Yep.
make a lot of tea during the day. And I, at the height of my emetophobia, had such a ritual around making a cup of tea. So I would first have to wash my hands before I touched anything, okay, including the kettle, cup, whatever. So I would then wash my hands before I did anything. I'd open the cupboard, get my cup out, boil the kettle. Now, once I boiled the kettle, I'd have to then steam the cup, because I had imagined all of these dangerous germs on the cup, even though it was a clean cup.
Yep.
I would steam the cup. I would wash my hands again because I'd touched the kettle. I'd get my spoon out, put it inside my cup, steam the spoon, okay, because again, dangerous germs could be on the spoon, even though it was a clean spoon. I'd then wash my hands again because I'd have to touch the tea bag, and then the tea bag would go in. And then I have to get the milk out of the fridge, again, washing my hands, checking the milk and double checking the milk, smelling the milk every time. It took me a long time to make a cup of tea.
Yeah.
It really did, a very, very long time. By the time I'd made the cup of tea, I didn't want the cup
You
of
don't
tea
even want it anymore.
particularly. Right?
Yeah.
But when I then came to understand my imagination, I was thinking, but that's how I imagine making a cup of tea. I can't even imagine myself making a cup of tea without all of those steps in. What does that even look like?
Yep.
How would I even do that? So I had to consciously look around for evidence. So what I did was I watched who is my now husband, or my boyfriend at the time, and I went, right, what does he do? I actually watched him. What does he do when he makes a cup of tea? So he sort of wanders downstairs with his phone in his hand, and he's scrolling through Twitter at the time, X now, right? So scrolling through Twitter, doesn't really look up from his phone, flicks the kettle on, carries on, still not looking up from the phone. You know, the cup comes out, the teaspoon goes in, tea bag goes in, never washes his hands once, you know, makes the cup of tea, stirs it, doesn't sniff the milk, doesn't check the date on the milk,
Yeah.
wanders back upstairs, right? And I was thinking, crikey, right, okay, that is a lot of steps that he's just eliminated there.
Yeah.
But that is a non-emetophobic way of making a cup of tea.
Yep.
So I thought, right, what I'm not doing is telling myself I have to do all of those things, because at that point in time, I didn't believe that I could drop those safety-seeking behaviours. But I thought, the first step here, if I don't even imagine myself making it differently, I'm not going to be able to take those steps. So I got myself sat down somewhere comfy, and I shut my eyes. And I was like, okay, I'm going to literally imagine myself walking down the stairs, opening the cupboard without washing my hands, getting the cup out, putting the spoon in. And I wanted to imagine really clearly, from start to finish, how I would perform that task. Now, what I found really, really difficult, which I'm sure you find with your clients as well, is that it doesn't go smoothly the first time. So when you've sat down and you've gone, okay, this is how I want to perform this task, because you've rehearsed over and over again performing that task in the unhelpful way, performing that task with all the avoidance and safety-seeking behaviours, performing that task being hyper-vigilant and being super aware of all these perceived threats, your imagination wants to do what you've performed because you're practiced. It's easy to go that way. So I sat myself down and I did the first few steps, and then I realised that I was imagining myself washing my hands, or I was imagining myself checking and double checking the milk, and then I'd have to go, oh, hang on a minute, no, take yourself back. And then I'd go back in my mind to coming down the stairs. Okay, right, all right, let's go for it again. And I'd go for it again. And I'd get a bit further, and my imagination would wander off again. And I go, no, let's go back. Okay, here we go. And we go through it again. And it took me a long time to be able to even imagine myself making up a cup of tea how I wanted to make a cup of tea. And I like to give a metaphor, if you will, or a comparison. Now that I am a mum, my imagination and your imagination, when you are thinking in emetophobic ways, is almost like a toddler, okay, who's seen a big muddy puddle, right? So, and they're not wearing their boots, and they're not wearing their splash suits, and they are totally not dressed for a big muddy puddle, but they clock it and they see it and they go, oh, muddy puddle, and they go in that direction, okay? Now, as a parent, you want to go, oh, no, we can't go in the muddy puddle today. We haven't got our boots on. And you steer them off in the right direction. Really gently, really kindly. You're not berating them for wanting to go in that direction. You're not getting mad with them. You're not getting stressed with them. You're just really gently guiding them in the right direction. I don't know a toddler. I've never met a toddler yet who would take no, we're going this way on the first on the first go,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
No, they'll go yeah, and then they'd go again. Okay, they'd try again, and you've got to gently move them, okay, and redirect them
Yep.
really calmly, really nicely, really warmly in the right direction until eventually they start going in the right direction. That's the same with your imagination. So when you are imagining, trying to imagine these things how you want them to go, your imagination is going to wander off like that toddler towards that puddle. What you don't want to do is then get mad with yourself, get stressed with yourself, get wound up with yourself, get frustrated with yourself, because that's not going to help the situation. It's going to make you feel annoyed at yourself. It's going to lower your self-esteem. It's going to lower your self-belief. You want to have oodles of patience with yourself, just like you do with a toddler who's in a puddle, right?
Yep.
Oodles of patience, and just ever so gently bring yourself back and go, okay, let's start again. And you might need to get up and go and have a walk and then come back to it later on. That's fine. There's no time pressure here.
Yep.
But the important part of it is that you do spend the time to start rehearsing the way you want things to go rather than how you fear they're going to go, how you
Yep.
want to respond rather than how you fear how things are going to you're going to respond. Sorry.
Yep.
Does that relate to yourself and your clients?
It definitely does. And you said a couple of things that kind of will lead us perfectly into what I wanted to say, which is being realistic and not berating yourself. So
Yes.
I can already see the viewers and the listeners being like, all right, well, I'm just going to imagine everything being wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to work out like that. I'm always
Nope.
telling my clients, we live on planet Earth. If you haven't noticed, we're not in fantasy land.
Yep.
So if all you've known for the past 10, 20, 30 years, even 1 year, it doesn't matter. If all
Yep.
you know is somebody says restaurant, I panic.
Yep.
Or my kid says, I feel sick, I panic. If that's all you know, you can't realistically say, okay, well, I'm going to use my imagination. And next time that happens, it's going to just be wonderful and easy. It's not going to
No.
be.
No.
So,
Nope.
what you want to do, well, first of all, so now you know you've just been running on autopilot. That's the first step, is realizing you've only thought up until this point, I just have to assume everything's going to be horrible. So
Yep.
now you know you don't have to do that.
Yep.
All you have to do is just imagine yourself in the situation a bit more realistically. So I
Yes.
think a great first step might be, okay, let's use the mom example, because I work with mostly moms. Let's say
Yeah.
that the kid comes home from school and says somebody was sick.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the mom doesn't just say, okay, that sounds good. We know that the next question is, what kind of sick? Tell me, was
Yep.
it a runny nose or is it a stomach? I have 100 questions I have to
Were you
ask.
close to them? Did you
And
sit
even
next
if,
to them?
and even when you tell me the answers, I'm still not going to
Yeah.
believe you and I'm going to have to ask more questions. So
Yeah.
you can't imagine, all right, I'm just going to ask no questions and everything's going to be wonderful. You could say, okay, in that moment, I'm probably still going to create anxiety.
Yes.
That's okay. But now I know in that moment, I can at least just catch it and remind myself, okay, the reason I'm asking these questions is just because I want more control over the situation. That
Yes.
right there, you've just done a million times better than you've ever done before.
Yes.
Because in the
Yep.
past, it was just, oh my God, it's the worst thing in the world. I can't come near you. Now I
Yep.
feel like a bad mom. Oh, yeah. You just need to take one step
Yep.
in the right direction towards using your imagination a bit more helpfully.
Yep.
And then the next time, a little bit better, a little bit better. And that's all that this is, because you
Yes.
just did the opposite to get here. Every time
Yes.
you just used it, not poorly, that's not the right word, used it catastrophically,
Yep.
a million times.
Yep.
Now that's what built the habit of just autopilot catastrophic thoughts. Now you just start to think a little bit more helpfully. That's it. So
Yep.
being realistic, that's such
Yep.
an important way to put this. Being
Yes.
realistic
Yes.
and not going into this thinking I have to be perfect.
Yeah.
You
100%.
you literally just need to get a tiny bit better every time. And fortunately for all you guys and gals listening and watching, you don't need to do all this 10 million times, like the 10 million times that you have in the past where felt out of control or avoided, felt
Yes.
out of control or catastrophized, grabbed your ginger, your mints, your drugs, whatever it may be. You did that 10 million times. You just need to do this for a handful of weeks the right way,
Yep.
a little bit better
Yep.
to just switch things.
Yes.
Um, so don't
Yes.
try to be a perfectionist. Don't say, I usually ask 100 questions to my kid, and I still ask 99, and I failed, and I'm horrible. No,
Yeah.
you just made a 1%
Yeah.
increase in doing this correctly. Just
Correct.
do more of it for
Absolutely.
longer. That's all that this is.
Definitely. Yes. And that leads beautifully back to my story of the tea, right? I imagined it going how I wanted it to go. That did not mean by any shape or form that the next time I went to make up a tea, I made it perfectly.
Of course not.
And that I dropped all of those safety seeking behaviors. Absolutely did not. That's not how it went at all. But being able to imagine myself how I wanted it to go meant that I felt at least more in control
Yeah,
and a
yeah, yeah.
little bit more comfortable when I did think, okay, I'm going to wash my hands for a little bit less today. I'm
Yep,
going to drop one of my hand washing today. I'm only going to check the milk once today.
yep,
That felt much more comfortable because I'd rehearsed it. But it is those 1% gains. It's those little tiny incremental steps, those little tiny things that you go, okay, that was something that I would have found really hard, and I've just accepted that that's what I do. But actually, I don't want to do that. I can see the end goal. I've imagined the end goal.
yep.
And we need to look at that as well. Come back to that in a second in terms of long-term emetophobia-free.
Hmm.
I've imagined the end goal. So now I just need to start taking those steps towards it
Yeah,
as and when I feel powerful enough to. I don't need to force myself to do anything that's going to make me panic or force myself to do anything that makes me super, super uncomfortable. Just a little bit of discomfort, a little tiny bit outside my comfort zone, but to the extent that I know I can cope with. My imagination is going to massively help me there if I'm doing it in the right way rather than just imagining. Because if I had never imagined changing how I made a cup of tea, let's say, then me trying to change washing of my hands or sniffing the milk would have been incredibly difficult because I'd
yeah,
never even seen it happen in another way. That
yep,
was just the way that I'd imagined it.
yep.
So it's the first step. And obviously, as you were talking then, you were sort of saying, the viewers and listeners might be thinking, okay, so I'm going to imagine everything going perfectly. That's just an example of your black and white thinking as well. Okay,
Mm,
so it's either terrible or it's perfect. It's not. It's all very grey, and it's all very just taking those teeny tiny steps in the right direction when you feel comfortable and ready to.
yep, yep.
Yeah, perfect. This isn't something that's new either. So something else that I wanted to bring up is that our imagination is, a psychological concept that is really well understood in many different areas, particularly in things like sports and in dance. So I don't know how familiar you are with rugby, British rugby.
No,
No,
not much.
no. So there's
That's
a guy. Is
a
the
European thing.
yeah, it is. So for anyone listening who's not familiar with rugby, it's similar to soccer or to football, where they've got to at some points kick the ball through a goal, right? But it's a really tall goal. It's really high up in the air, and they have it still, and they just take a try kick. It's called, and they try and kick it through the goal. Now, there's a guy who Johnny Sexton is called. He's the captain of the Irish team, and when the Six Nations are on, because I'm a fan of the Six Nations, his imagination is so on display. It's so clear to see because he puts the ball down and he looks at the goal. He takes a few steps back and he looks at the ball and he looks at the goal and back to the ball and back to the goal and back to the ball and back to the goal. And all he's doing really clearly is imagining the ball going through the goal,
Yep.
right? Over and over and over again. And that's something that most sports men and women do. When, Usain Bolt is on the start line, I don't know if he's still the fastest in the world. I've lost track with that now. But either way, when he's on the start line of that 100-meter sprint, he's imagining winning that 100-meter sprint. He's
Mhm.
imagining that going really well. It's a concept that's used the world over. This is not something new that we've kind of made up
Right.
or we've just sort of, cottoned onto. It's really well used. Actors, over and over again, they rehearse how they're going to say things. They rehearse it going well. They rehearse the scene going as they want the scene to go. It is just something, it's a tool that you may not have had up until now, you may not have been aware of up until now, but it's a psychological tool that you really want to get a handle on because it does affect the outcome of things.
Yeah.
Now, when I say it affects the outcome of things, what I'm not saying is Johnny Sexton scores that try every time. He doesn't, okay? But by imagining it going the way he wants it to go, he is increasing the likelihood of it going in
Yeah.
rather than imagining missing it or
Yep.
imagining missing the try. So you're almost priming yourself for that good scenario, that good outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk a little bit about another common misconception when I'm taking clients through, which is I've got to imagine everything going perfectly, as in working with a lovely lady recently who was terrified of her children waking up in the middle of the night being sick.
That's a
Okay,
common one. Yep.
it is a common one, right? So I'm imagining, it's the middle of the night, you hear them cough, and you're looking at the
It's
baby
always the
monitor going,
cough.
oh no, it's the cough, right? Oh, the baby monitor, are they coughing or are they being sick? And
Yeah.
what's going on there, right? So she thought, I have to imagine them never coughing and never being sick in the middle of the night. So they just sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to imagine it going the way I want it to go. And the way I want it to go is that they don't cough and that they're not sick, right? Yes, because that's the likelihood of the situation, because the majority of the nights when you look at statistics, they aren't going to cough and they're not going to be sick because
Mm-hmm.
it's not a very common thing. So yes, you do want to gain perspective and go,
Yes.
actually, this is really not likely to happen. And the likelihood is, yeah, they are going to sleep through the night. But you also want to rehearse the scenario where they do cough and they do throw up and you respond how you want to respond to them.
Yep.
Right. And that's the important thing. So it's not that you have to imagine it all going perfectly, this external world. Cloud, I don't know what you called it, Cuckoo Land. I don't know if you called it
Fantasyland.
right. Fantasy Land, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to imagine that. But you do have to gain perspective because remember, your emetophobia belief is trying to convince you that being sick or your kids being sick or people being sick around you is more likely
Mm-hmm.
than it actually is. So you've got to gain the perspective, but then you are actually imagining responding or reacting in the way that you want to respond and react.
Yep.
And that's the key.
Yes. And I need to talk more about the perfectionism because
Yes.
people are going to. So everybody, unless you know about this program, pretty much the vast majority of the world, and myself included, before going through this program, I just thought, oh, being a perfectionist is great.
Yes.
There's a big difference between always setting high goals for yourself, trying to hit them. If you don't hit them, saying to yourself, all right, didn't do that perfectly, didn't have to go perfectly. How can I adjust and do a bit better next time?
Yeah.
That's one thing. Perfectionism is it has to be this insane, ridiculous goal. And then when I don't hit it, I'm going to be mad at myself and yell at myself. So I'm going to set a higher goal.
Yes.
And I'm definitely not going to hit that one. And then I'm going to yell at myself even more. So we don't want people to say, all right, I'm going to imagine this. Just like you said, I'm going to imagine my daughter being sick in the middle of the night and I'm going to be excited and love it.
Right. Yep.
You would be, I tell my clients, you're not going to get there. That's not what this is.
Nope.
I don't know who is like that, but we can't help you. Right. No. So that is not the end goal. The end goal is to just think about it how everybody else thinks about it, which is inconvenient, would prefer it not to happen. Kind of gross. I'll get through it. No big deal.
Yep.
But as long as you think, so even in that situation, if you're imagining, all right, my daughter coughs and I'm going to have zero anxiety.
Right.
You're going to be very disappointed with yourself. You're going to yell at yourself. You're going to set a higher goal. So you can't do that. You have to be realistic. So that's why I think a good first step is, all right, this is the first time imagining this in a different way ever.
Yep.
I'm probably going to create some anxiety. That's okay.
Yep.
But now I'm going to just take a step back, try to get perspective, just think about things a little bit differently. That's all you have to do. You're going in the right direction. Just do more of that for longer. That's it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the stumbling block to that, you're completely right. The stumbling block to that is that when you have emetophobia, you sometimes don't have that perspective on what people without emetophobia would react like. Exactly. So they're going, how would somebody without emetophobia feel in this situation? And the likelihood is if your child is waking up in the middle of the night and being sick, likelihood is you're caught off guard there. A non-emetophobe, you're sound asleep, something wakes you up, your child's in distress, you're going to create a bit of anxiety. You're going, whoa, okay, I was sound asleep and now I'm jumping to action. Even non-emetophobes would create some level of adrenaline rush there because they're thinking, oh, right, okay, I need to go and sort this out. So it's understanding that, like as you said, eliminating unhelpful thoughts about being sick. Eliminating negative thoughts about being sick isn't the goal, because most
Right.
people think negatively and unhelpfully about being sick because it's not a nice thing.
Yep.
But it's being knowing you can handle it. It's being able to cope when it does
Yes.
happen. That's the goal and that's the aim.
Yes.
And sometimes the hardest one to imagine is, and it's different for everybody, right? Because some people are phobic of themselves being sick, some people are phobic of other people being sick, some people are phobic of both. But if you are phobic of yourself being sick, it's understanding, okay, how do I want to respond to that? And what does a non-emetophobe feel like, if you will, when they are sick? How do they respond to that nausea feeling, to that nausea
Yes.
whoosh? And it's taking the time to find that perspective, taking the time to look, as I did when I watched my husband wander down the stairs with the phone, right?
Yep.
Ask somebody who hasn't got emetophobia and who doesn't particularly mind being sick what they do.
Hmm.
What is their thought process when they do feel that first wave of nausea? What is their response? How do they respond? Because
Yep.
sometimes you need that perspective when you've had it, especially when you've had it since your early childhood. You've never considered that you could respond in a different way.
Yep.
You've never considered that you can, feel nausea and be sick without panicking.
Yep.
That's not entered your head. So it's okay. Well, what does that even look like?
Yep.
Again, so it's having that conversation, if you will, and choose the person that you have the conversation with really carefully.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Go on.
I would say anybody who's listening to this, go back and listen to the last like 2 or 3 minutes. Everything that you just said, Michelle, is so dead on. Everybody asks these things. Everybody worries about these things. Everybody's confused about these things, but you just nailed it very succinctly, better than I could ever do. The non-emetophobic brain is not going to be excited
Nope.
about being sick.
Nope.
They're not going to say, "Oh, my daughter's coughing. Let's go." I'm like, "This is going to be great." It's
Nope.
not going to happen.
Nope.
The non-emetaphobic brain will be like, "What's going on? Heart's beating
Yep.
a little bit faster.
Yep.
What's going on? Is she okay? Got to make sure
Yep.
this is okay. All right, this is
Yep.
not ideal. This is kind of messy. I hope she feels okay. I mean, it
Yep.
would kind of stink if it went through the whole house. I mean, we have to go
Yeah.
to work, but if it happens, we'll get through it.
That's it.
That's
Yes.
that's it. That's the end
Yes.
goal. You're not going to love it.
Yes.
Nobody loves it except the guys in the Jackass show and the Jackass movies. I'm always talking about those people to
I've
my
not seen that
client.
in years.
They get sick of me saying it, but I tell them the only people who love it are those guys, and
Yeah.
they love it because they're getting paid like $1 million to do gross things and throw up on each other. I
Yes.
would love it too. You're not going to be those guys. Everybody else besides them thinks,
Yep.
really
I'd rather not.
not excited about this.
Correct.
That's the end goal.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Great example from my own household recently. My sister, who I'm pointing over there if you're watching this and not listening on Spotify, lives down the road from me.
Yep.
And it was her birthday, and we'd all planned to go round for a takeaway a few
Mhm.
months ago. And my dad texted saying, "Oh, you're all more than welcome, but just to let you know, we've all had a sickness bug this weekend." And this was like the Sunday night. And he said, "Okay, well, we kind of started on the Friday, and Jane's still a little bit ill now, but we got on the other side of it." So I read the message out to my husband, and he looked and he went, "No."
Mhm.
Right? My husband has never had emetophobia.
Yep.
He's not particularly bothered about being sick, but he was like, "Why on earth would we do that?"
Yeah.
As you said, we've got to go to work. Imagine the three of us catching it, and then my daughter being ill, and then you being ill, not being able to work and cancelling your clients, and me not being able to go to work. And no, and he didn't want to go. And that's not an emetophobic response. That's a very normal response.
Yes.
This isn't something that I would want. I
Yes.
would rather avoid that
Yes.
situation where I could. But it wasn't driven by fear. He wasn't driven by, I couldn't cope with that if it happened. That's the worst thing in the world. I have to avoid that like the plague. It was just, no, I'd really prefer not to. So
Yeah.
let's not.
Yeah. I gave the example the other day to a client, like very similar to that. Given the choice, be sick or don't be sick. I think most people would say, I'd rather not be
Or
sick.
not be, yeah.
If you're avoiding it, like you said, like the plague, that's one thing.
Yep.
Let's say, so like exactly like what you just said. Let's say somebody invited me over to their house.
Mhm.
Same thing, friend. I was just sick. I would say, I'm not going.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what about tomorrow?
Mm.
I'll come next week. Be
Yes.
fine.
Yeah.
I don't have time for it. It's gross. I don't really, whatever.
Yeah.
That's how I think about it. But let's say that this is the example that I gave somebody the other day. Let's say that your grandma just died, and it's gonna be the last time you can go see her, like at the funeral,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And you're thinking it's somebody, like cousin's gonna be there, and they were just sick.
Okay.
If you're saying I cannot go, worst thing in the world, I don't care who's there, I don't care if it's
Yeah.
grandma, I don't care if it's mom, can't do it.
Mhm.
That's one thing.
Yes.
That's something that we would need to work on. But if
Yes.
it's just some, no, I see you every single day.
Yeah. Yeah,
Why
yeah.
risk it? I'm busy. I have
Yes.
clients. It's,
Yes.
summer. It's gonna be sunny out. I want to be outside.
Yep.
Those are two completely different things. So
They are.
I love the example that you gave. Just
Mm.
he was like, no, I mean, given the choice, why risk
Why
it?
would I do that? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it is one of those things that if you find yourself in a situation like that, a particular example, there was a choice whether to go or not.
Yep.
Sometimes you are thrust into a situation and you didn't know that it was going to happen. So you could be at a children's birthday party, for example, and one of the children throw up, right? That could happen. It's one of those things as well that you want to imagine yourself, going back to imagination, right? You want to imagine yourself being able to think, okay, I would really prefer us not to get this. I
Mm-hmm.
would really, really, really prefer us not to have this situation. But, I'm going to just make sure we all wash our hands before we leave. And then we're going to carry on with our lives. And if it happens, it happens.
Yep.
And that's the goal. It's not, I'm going to be super hyper vigilant. I'm going to stop eating. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to stop my kids from
Yep.
eating and drinking much. There's a very big difference between it being all-consuming fear and being on your mind for the next week or two
Mm-hmm.
that child has thrown up, and you stopping yourself eating and feeling physically sick because of it,
Watching the
and
clock.
going
When's it gonna get me?
exactly, and you being able to go, okay, really rubbish, would prefer that not to have happened, not ideal, but I can handle this. If it happens, it happens. Let's go with it.
Yeah.
That's the goal,
Yeah.
right? So
I
it's
think people
in.
need to. Oh, sorry.
Go
Go
on.
ahead.
Sorry, no.
One thing just popped into my head. People comparing themselves to others. A lot of
Mm,
times I hear like a mom say, this kid threw up, and I was freaking out. This would be at the beginning when we're first meeting, and
yeah,
they would say, but the other parents, they didn't care at all.
yeah,
Digging more deeply into that conversation, we found out, or I found out, and actually found out. She said, "Oh, actually, no, I guess that makes sense because those parents, their kid is just one of those pukey kids.
yeah,
It happens all the time. To them,
yeah.
it's no different than the kid just sneezing.
Yes,
That's
yes,
why. So you can't be like, oh, but look at them, they're so calm, and I wish I could be like that. Everybody's
yeah,
different. We don't know
yes.
everybody's story, and we don't care about them.
No,
We want you. You know what I mean? They're not thinking
yeah.
about you, so stop thinking about them.
Absolutely, yeah. And also, you don't know what they're thinking. They might,
That's true.
on the outside, have been very calm and very blasé about it, but on the inside, they're going, oh, and then planning the week out around having to miss work because the kids are off sick, right? You
That's
don't.
true. Yeah.
We've no idea what they're thinking. So it's
Yeah.
comparison is really unhelpful. It's looking at your goal, as in your start point where you are now with emetophobia, and where you want to get to, which is realistic, and starting to put your imagination to good use to help you rather than hinder you, and imagine yourself living a life without emetophobia. Imagine yourself getting yourself through a day enjoying the sun,
Yep.
be feeling calm on the way to pick the kids up from school, enjoying eating your food without having to go through it, is this cooked, and having all of those scary thoughts around it.
Yep.
You want to start putting all of that into practice in your mind, because it is going to be one of the big hurdles that you knock down for yourself when you nail that.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Brilliant. Lovely. I think we've covered everything we wanted to talk about on imagination. Do you agree, Matt?
I think so. I think that and more.
I'm more. Good. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. So we will leave it there for today. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been
Of
a
course.
pleasure.
Thank you, Michelle.